The Year to Their podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Year to Their, it's time to start the fun.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Year to Their podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. I'm your host, Phil Grimlich, and each and every week I will bring you a different Walt Disney World word and then give you background, tips, tricks, hints, all kinds of stuff about that word. Basically, my goal is to give you a little bit of Disney, your Disney fix in 15 minutes or less. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I go over those 15 minutes. Sometimes I come in a little under those 15 minutes, but that's the goal. So without further ado, here we go. This week's Walt Disney World Word of the Week is brought to you by the letter U. U for Ub. Yes, you heard me right. U for Ub. Ub is not really a word, it is a name. And it is a very super important name in the history of the Disney company because it's the first name of Ub Iwerks. Now, if you're a Disney nerd like I am, you probably already know the name Ub Iwerks. You may have even seen it on Main Street USA somewhere. But this week, I wanted to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of history on the man who was so instrumental in the history of the Disney company. So Ub Iwerks was born on March 24th, 1901, coincidentally the same year Walt Disney was born. And he was born and raised in Kansas City, where Walt Disney, a young Walt Disney, spent a lot of his childhood. Ub Iwerks met Walt Disney in 1919 when they were both 18-year-olds working for an art studio in Kansas City. In 1920, Ub Iwerks convinced Walt Disney to partner with him and to go into business with him, and they founded the Disney Iwerks Studio. And here comes one of my favorite parts of the Ub Iwerks story, right? Because they decided that Disney Iwerks sounded too much like an optometrist office, and they switched the name from Disney Iwerks to the Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists. So Walt and Ub worked together for a while. They actually got a couple of jobs with the United Leatherworkers Journal and the Restaurant News in Kansas City. Now, with the money that they earned from those jobs, Walt and Ub rented a small studio in the Railway Exchange Building in Kansas City. Unfortunately for Ub and for Walt, they weren't making a ton of money on their own, so they both took full-time jobs as cartoonists for the Kansas City Slide Company, which was later renamed the Kansas City Film Ad Services. Luckily, the office where they worked was just around the corner from the Railway Exchange Building, so Ub and Walt continued to do their own thing and do their own art on the side. Now, it was actually during the time that they worked for the Kansas City Slide newspaper company where Walt Disney decided he wanted to go into animation. So Ub Iwerks, who was really Disney's closest friend and confidant, followed him into the field of animation. Now, in 1921, Walt Disney was contacted by Milton Feld, and he wanted him to animate 12 cartoons that would be shown in theaters before feature films. Now, this was the beginning of the Laugh-O-Gram Studio and the Laugh-O-Gram Films. And of course, Walt Disney brought in Ub Iwerks as his chief animator for these films. Unfortunately, even though they were learning the ropes of animation and they were figuring it all out, Laugh-O-Gram Studios did not last very long, and they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1923. Now, we all kind of know Walt's story from here, right? After Laugh-O-Gram went bankrupt, Walt famously got on a train and headed out to Los Angeles with a cardboard suitcase and a coat and pants that didn't even match. But guess what? He bought a first-class ticket because Walt always did things all the way. He never went halfway. So when Walt got out there, he wanted to become a director. He had really no ambition at all of continuing his art or his animation career. And after being on movie sets, actually sneaking on movie sets, walking on, spending the entire days on movie studios, he wasn't able to get a job, so he went again and went back to animation. When he was still working with Ub Iwerks in his Laugh-O-Gram studios, they had started production on the Alice comedies. So Gutsy Walt sent a letter to Margaret Winkler and told her that he was in the process of creating an all-new cartoon technology and his brand new cartoon studio. Margaret Winkler bought it, hook, line, and sinker, and offered Walt a contract. Then Ub Iwerks joined his buddy out in Los Angeles to work on the Alice comedies. And this was the Disney Studios' first big hit, right? Ub Iwerks and Walt Disney's Alice comedies were a huge hit, and Margaret Winkler gave them another contract to create a new character. So with that new contract, Ub Iwerks came up with the character of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit all by himself. So Iwerks creates Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. He animates the first Oswald cartoon completely on his own. And here's where it gets a little bit dicey, right? See, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit wasn't owned at this point, not until much, much later, was not owned by the Disney studio. Oswald was owned by Universal Studios and Charles Mintz and Margaret Winkler. Charles Mintz was actually the husband of Margaret Winkler, and he and Universal Studios did not like the appearance of Oswald in the first cartoon. So since they didn't like it, they made Iwerks create a new version of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and Oswald went on to become a big hit for Universal Studios in 1927. Ub Iwerks' character was doing so well in 1927 and 1928, actually, that Walt Disney decided, you know what? We're not getting enough money for this Oswald character. I'm going to go out to New York. I'm going to talk to Charles Mintz. I'm going to get a raise, and we're going to make all new Oswald cartoons. As I've talked about it on this podcast before, it didn't really go that way for Walt when he made it out to New York. Not only did Mintz not give Walt and Iwerks a raise, he instead said, guess what, Walt? You don't own Oswald. I do. You're going to finish this series of cartoons with Oswald in them, and then you're never going to work on Oswald again. We're taking a character. We're going to control him. Oh, and by the way, all your animators, I own them now. They work for me. They work for Universal. They no longer work for the Disney studio. And that was true, but it wasn't all of Walt's animators. Can you guess which one animator remained loyal to Walt? Yup, you got it. It was Ub Iwerks. He was the only one that stood by Walt and did not go with Universal Studios. So after the coup of Walt's animators and Charles Mintz, Walt hopped back on the train and took the very famous train ride from New York back to Los Angeles, where, as the story goes, he came up with the first sketch and idea for Mickey Mouse. Now, it's been disputed by some people in the Iwerks family that he did not come up with Mickey on that train ride. It's also pretty well known that he didn't come up with the name Mickey. He came up with the name Mortimer. And it was, in fact, his wife Lillian who had Walt change the name to Mickey because it sounded friendlier. But one thing that really isn't in dispute is that Walt took that rough sketch of Mickey Mouse and he gave it to Ub Iwerks and said, hey, Ub, make this friendlier. Make this more of a character than he looks like right now. And it was actually Ub Iwerks who created the first full-blown, fully drawn-out Mickey Mouse. So the problem here was that Ub and Walt and the rest of his animators, who Walt apparently hated now, were still tasked with finishing the Oswald series. But Walt said to Ub, you know what, Ub, don't you work on Oswald at all. You're done with Oswald. You work on Mickey. You animate this new character that we created, Mickey Mouse, all day, every day. So Ub would have a drawing of Oswald to cover over his Mickey sketches on his desk, just so none of the other animators could look over and see that he was actually not working on Oswald the Lucky Rabbit at all. And Ub worked at like breakneck speed, like total, no one could draw as quickly and as well as he could. As a matter of fact, Ub animated the entire first Mickey Mouse silent cartoon, Plain Crazy, entirely by himself within a 3-week period. He would work days, he would work nights in his studio. He was doing up to 700 drawings each day. That is just insane, especially because the average animator today creates 80 to 100 drawings per week. So yeah, look at it that way. His numbers were insane at how quickly he put Plain Crazy out there. So then Ub animated Steamboat Willie in 1928 almost entirely by himself. And he also created these Silly Symphony animations almost entirely by himself as well, including the super successful and famous Silly Symphony. That was hard to say. Super successful and famous Silly Symphony. The Skeleton Dance. That's a lot of S's. I got a lot of S's in there. All right. So the early successes and the early achievements of Mickey Mouse and really of Walt Disney had a ton to do with Ub Iwerks. As they say, as Vince Vaughn said in Swingers, he was the guy behind the guy. Unfortunately, in 1930, Ub and Walt had a falling out, mostly because Ub accepted a contract, another job with a rival cartoonist, Pat Powers, who actually had a falling out with Walt years before. So Ub opened his Iwerks studio in 1930, and he was pretty successful. He came up with a character named Flip the Frog, who was very famous around that time. He created Willie Whopper, who was another, well, not as, listen, I'm talking like I was around in the 30s, but he wasn't as famous a character as Flip the Frog. And then he created the Common Color cartoons, which were a series of 25 animated short cartoons between 1933 and 1936. In 1937, and let me try to get this name right, Leon Schlesinger, I hope I pronounced it right, Productions contracted Ub Iwerks to produce 4 Looney Tunes shorts starring Porky Pig and Gabby Goat, who I've actually never heard of. I'm going to look up Gabby Goat. Hold on, this is going to be instantaneous for you, but it might take me a minute. And wow, what can you find on the internet in a matter of moments? Gabby is a goat character that was originally Porky Pig's sidekick. He basically looked like Porky Pig with a beard, horns, and a scowl. He was short-tempered, he was angry, and he was a perfect foil for Porky Pig. The character didn't really work out. The concept didn't really work out. So Porky Pig lives on. Gabby Goat, we hardly knew ye. Anyway, Iwerks then went on to work for Columbia Pictures Cartoon Division and then returned to Disney in 1940. And that's where he gets the credit for actually combining live action and animation in the 1946 Disney film Song of the South. While he was on his second tour of duty with Disney, Iwerks also figured out how to have a Xerox of cartoon cells. This saved a lot of time and a lot of money, and each and every element of every cell did not have to be drawn by hand. During the 1960s, Ub moved over to work for WED, Walter Elias Disney, which we all now know as WDI or Walt Disney Imagineering, and he worked on really famous attractions like It's a Small World, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and the Hall of Presidents. Ub won an Academy Award in 1965 for Mary Poppins, where he again blended the animation with the real-life actors of the film, and he even went out on loan to Alfred Hitchcock and helped him develop the special effects of the flocks of attacking birds in the classic Hitchcock film, The Birds. Toward the end of his life, Iwerks continued to work for the Walt Disney Company, and he created a number of innovations for the Florida Project, which would eventually become Walt Disney World. Sadly, Ub passed away at the age of 70 on July 7th, 1971 in Los Angeles. But actually, his story doesn't end there. Ub Iwerks later was named a Disney legend, as was his son, Don Iwerks, who worked for Disney for years and also was the creator of the 360-degree camera that Disney used in the Circle Vision 3D films. Now, not only were Ub and Don named Disney legends, they were also given their very own window on Main Street, USA, inside the Magic Kingdom. So remember when I said you probably have seen his name in the parks? Well, there you have it. His name is on a window in the Magic Kingdom and is seen by thousands of guests each and every day. The window reads, Iwerks, stereoscopic cameras. Ub Iwerks, Don Iwerks, repairs, modifications, no two exactly alike. And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. As always, thank you so much for listening. It is always greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoyed this one. Just like I always say, I hope you enjoy each and every episode that I put out there. And if you did enjoy it, I just have one favor to ask. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, rate, and review this show. If you subscribe to it, you'll get both shows every week automatically downloaded on whatever device you listen on. And with that rating and review, it'll just help more people see the show and get the word out there. So I really appreciate that in advance. I made up a tutorial that makes it really easy to do all of that. So go to eartotheretravel.com/iTunes. And there you'll find a step-by-step tutorial that teaches you how to subscribe, how to rate the show, how to review the show. It really couldn't be easier. I did it. So you can do it. So I really appreciate that in advance. So again, the address is eartotheretravel.com/iTunes. And just remember, there will be a new episode of the Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week, each and every Wednesday morning, as well as a regular episode of the Ear to There podcast each and every Monday morning. So thank you again so much for listening. Until next time, have a fantastic week. Bye-bye.